All right, welcome everyone to our session today about food demand and supply of private food assistance here in the United States, and a lot of talk about what happened during the pandemic. There will be 4 presenters today, and I am moderating, and so I'll roughly 20 minutes per presentation, and then we'll have save some time for questions at the end. So if you have questions, jot them down. We'll have time for that at the end. We want to make sure we give our presenters a chance to share their incredible research. So without further ado, we'll invite Craig up for the first presentation.
Is it loaded onto here?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Okay, Gunnarsson for you. Okay. Okay, so for some reason I wasn't on the app, so I won't take offense if anybody's like, I didn't think Gunnarsson was going to be presenting, and that's why I'm here. And therefore, because I'm presenting, you're like, I don't want to be here now. That's fine. You can just get up and leave. And I won't take offense to that because I was not on the app. But I hope that's not the case. And then it'd be funnier if somebody's like, I'm accidentally in the wrong room and it looks like they're getting up against me. But anyway, so I'm excited to give this presentation. I'm very nervous, because my wife is here, and so I'd never, give a presentation in front of her. So I'm really nervous about this. But I hope I do fine. I wanted to thank Drew and Ann for inviting me to be a part of the session. It's really great. This is going to be a great set of papers, so it's great that you all are here. There's other sessions going on. Some are good, but none are as good as this. So it's good that you all are in the right session. It's great to see so many people here. It's packed and everything. So this is work just as a way of kind of introducing, this is work that's being done with colleagues. I do a lot of work. I'm at Baylor University. But my I do a lot of work with Feeding America, which is the umbrella organization for all food banks in the United States. And this is work that I'm doing with 3 of those colleagues, Tom Sommerfeld, Emily Engelhardt, and Bill Burns. I think some of you may know Emily, but anyway, this is a joint work with all of them. And all this, some of the work is using data that's taken from the current population survey, which everybody's aware of. But I'm also using 2 sets of proprietary data that's used by Feeding America. One about pounds distributed, and this other one called Service Insights, where there's some information about individuals going to food pantries. So, and I'll talk about each of these a little bit. So I want to convince everybody that this really is an important issue, okay? For too long, charitable food assistance there's these government programs, and then there's charitable food assistance. But I think that this figure here really does point out how important. So this is meals received per reported CFA recipient, charitable food assistance, SNAP recipient, and National School Lunch Program recipient. Okay, SNAP is by far the largest, and we can't talk about alleviating food insecurity without talking about SNAP, of course, right? But look, this green line here is for charitable food assistance, and this is the number of meals per person getting from charitable food assistance over the course of the year. You can see it's like from 2016 to 2020, roughly those going to charitable food assistance programs are getting on average 200 meals a year, okay? It's bigger than the National School Lunch Program, okay? So in other words, we're talking about, we have these tiny mediocre programs like WIC, and who wants to talk about WIC, but it gets so much attention in all of this, okay? But what we got to be talking a lot more about is charitable food assistance. So this is why this session is so important, that it's really coming to the limelight. So let me talk a little bit about this. Oh, the reason you probably wonder why I didn't include SNAP. The SNAP was everybody got the maximum benefit level, so it's kind of skewed upwards with respect to that. So that's why I didn't include that for 2020. So in other words, we got to be talking about charitable food assistance a lot more. In fact, I think this is the only session at this meeting on charitable food assistance, right? Is that correct? Okay, good. It used to be that you'd have like 10 on a WIC. Anyway, not anymore though. Okay, so this is pounds received by food banks by quarter. So this is the proprietary data that I was talking about, okay? And so what you see then is this is, for each of these quarters, 2016 all the way up to 2022, is, on average, you have about 1 billion, and there was this kind of a relatively small increase in here up to here, until 2020, about the amount of pounds distributed, roughly 1 billion. The reason why it seems odd to talk about food in pounds, okay, and that's usually when talk about it, but that's the way that's the numeraire the Feed America uses. Okay, just so you know. And then thinking about this is roughly it's 1.3 pounds per meal. So later on, I'm talking about meals. Okay. Now, if you all remember when COVID began, and it is, you know, it's over now, but when COVID began, is that there was these long lines at different food banks, like that one at San Antonio food bank. And there was all the pictures of the cars lining up and stuff. So we do know that there was a sharp uptick in terms of food banks, you know, so a lot more money. So in other words, Americans gave a lot more money to their food banks over this time period. We saw the sharp increase here in this is the second quarter of 2020, and then it stayed high. But look, now it's come back down to where it was. Okay, so sharp spike up, and now it's back pretty much where it was in the first quarter of 2020. Okay. This gives you a broad picture. Yes.
Are you able to discern the donors between 2020 and that spike period?
So basically, whenever I present these things, this is all driven by charitable donations. And this is, since you brought it up, I'm going to briefly talk about this now. Other food assistance programs like SNAP, it's demand driven, right? I mean, however many people want it, it's an entitlement program. More people need SNAP benefits, boom, it's there, right? And it's automatic, it's an entitlement program. That's not the case with charitable food assistance. I mean, if you don't got people giving money to give these things, you're not going to see any increase. It's not like a food bank can say, I'm going to borrow against the future. You can't, they can't do that. So this is solely because people gave a lot more money and now this fell. I mean, you know, like some of it's government funds. I mean, there's TFAP, which is an important program. The TFAP didn't increase dramatically. So this is completely driven by donations. Okay, now, building upon this point, before coming to what the relationship is between food banks and food insecurity, I want to show this. This is based upon information from 17 food banks in something called Service Insights. Okay, what Service Insights is, it's administrative records. Some of you may be familiar with the programs Link to Feed, Oasis. These are ones that are used by different food banks. Service Insights is a program which allows us to see patterns of visits by food bank. We call them neighbors, which I think is a neat term. The Feed America calls clients neighbors. These are information about the neighbors here. So what you see here is these are the characteristics of food bank neighbors and Service Insights over 3 months before COVID and 3 months after COVID. And these are all food banks that were in Service Insights for the entire time. Okay, so you see here is that the main point I want to make about this is before and after COVID, things really didn't change that much. Okay, except for one key dimension. The one key dimension is that you saw a lot more anonymous visits. Okay, so it was 1.2% back 3 months before COVID and 6.2% right after COVID began. Okay, now the same thing with, you had some other things like gender undisclosed was 2% 3 months before, went up to 8%, and then same with no race or ethnicity reported this increase. So in other words, I'm going to talk a little bit today about how things changed during COVID. Okay, this is not driven by the fact that food banks weren't collecting information. There were some changes, yes. I mean, more anonymous visits and stuff, but overall, the point I'm making about this is that Service Insights looks pretty much the same before and after in terms of collecting the data. Okay, that's the first thing I wanted to point out here. Second thing that I wanted to point out here, oh, somebody's in the chat. They probably get ignored all the time. Oh, but this one's important to listen to. You know why? Because it's from Mark Dembali. So when Mark Dembali speaks, we all listen, don't we? Okay, right? All you ERSs out there, I know when I used to work there, and Mark said something, we snapped to it. Okay, Mark says, please have the speaker and speak into the microphone. We cannot otherwise hear. Like, sorry, Mark, I was moving around a bit, kind of getting the audience engaged. I'm going to disengage from the audience and concentrate on you. Okay, so now let me come back to this. Okay, so here looks at this. Now, this next slide then is what this gives us. This gives us information about, I'm sorry, go back one slide. Okay, what this gives us information about then is the patterns of visits by neighbors to food banks and the number of visits. This is where things changed a little bit during COVID, okay? The first thing is, you'll notice here, what's the modal visit? Once a year. The average person goes to The modal person goes to food banks once a year. And also is if you look at the average number of months visit on the lower thing, you can't see that. Mark can see it online though, is that the average number of months visited rose from 2.4 in August 2018 and July 2019, and then August 2019 and July 20th is the number of visits. So the main thing that occurred during COVID then, so this, I mean, this isn't really quite COVID, it's because I don't have beyond July, but what you see is the number of visits to food banks, the bottom line, didn't change that much. The number of unduplicated counts, the number of people going to the food banks at least once, that didn't change that much. But what did change during COVID is people went to food banks more often. In other words, it wasn't that there was more people coming for the first time. It was more so that people were just coming more often. I think that's a really important thing to tell about the story. I mean, you hear these things like, oh, people were flooding the food banks during COVID. I mean, yes, but it's because people are going more often. Okay, that's the story. I think that's a story. If other people are going to be telling other stories, then that's the advantage of me going first. Well, the disadvantage of me going first. And you can say Gunnarson's got it all wrong. I don't know what he thinks. It's administrative data. Yeah, those people. Okay. Anyway, is that so? But what this gives us then is this gives us a picture about what's happened to pounds received by quarter, and then the food insecurity rate. Okay. Now this is one of these slides that looks dumb. Okay, right. You know, I got these things over here, but the thing I want to emphasize is on the left scale, on the right scale is the food insecurity rate. What you see here is that from, sorry, Mark. What you see here is that food insecurity rates from 2008 to 2014 were high, okay? And then they fell to 2019. This is one of the main stories about food insecurity that doesn't get told enough. Food insecurity rates were at an all-time low in 2019. Right? At an all-time low in 2019. The point I'm trying to make about putting these two things on here is food insecurity rates fell substantially over here. But look, this stayed pretty much the same. Okay? There's almost no connection between the amount of pounds distributed and food insecurity rates. They were expanding services or keeping things constant even when you had fewer and fewer people coming to food banks. In other words, people were getting more food when they went to food banks. I'm speaking very loosely there, pantries. I know all these distinctions, but they just fell. So I think this is important to emphasize. Okay, now what I want to do is turn to this figure here is the meals received per food insecure person. Now, I want to come back to this, of course. We all know food insecurity didn't really increase during COVID, right? And this is common knowledge that everybody knows this. It was for four main reasons. First, all those stimulus checks that went out. Secondly, everybody was bumped up to the maximum SNAP benefits. Third is food bank stepped in, helped out, right? That helped. And the fourth reason that people should be talking a lot more, but is solely neglected on this, is the fact that we had an amazing ag supply chain. It's crazy. Global pandemic, and still you could go to the food store and have these shelves full of food, right? And no price increase. I mean, sometimes like couple times, because I have this angel hair pasta dish that I really enjoy making. And a couple times I had to go there, they didn't have angel hair pasta. And I had to substitute spaghetti. And it just didn't bring out the richness of the dish. Because when you cook with angel hair pasta, it really tastes a lot different than if you go with ordinary spaghetti. But nevertheless, that wasn't a huge issue. I mean, I complained a lot to the press. Here's my concern during COVID, lack of angel hair pasta. I'm just joking. I didn't complain. There's no real news. But anyway, okay. So anyway, so this then gives this. What you see is that 2020, the food insecurity rates was much lower than 2017 and essentially the same as in 2018. Okay. But now what I want to do is turn to the issue of meals received per food insecure person. So the numeraire, I'm going to go through different denominators. And what this is, the meals received per food insecure person in the United States. And what you see then is that sorry, Mark, is that if you see here is that this was steadily increasing, okay? From 2016 to 2019, the number of meals received per food insecure person was steadily increasing. Then boom, it really went up a lot during COVID, okay? So the story here is just the average food insecure person is getting a lot more food from this. This one.
Is this the same data that you showed us that you're using from the service insights?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I should be clear because it is confusing. I'm talking about all these different data sets. This is a combination of data from pounds received that I talked about at the outset, and food insecure persons taken from CPS. So this is not from Service Insights. This is Pounds Received. Is that clear? Okay. So this went up a lot. What also went up a lot, though, is if you look here, is that you see is that the meals received per reported CFA recipient. Okay. So this is persons in CPS who said, I got meals from charitable food assistance. Now, two comments about this. We know that in survey data, people underreport participation, right? I mean, SNAP participation, I usually say rounded, it's about 30 percentage points lower than what it actually is. And those numbers are declining. Same with charitable food assistance. We know that this number is underreported in CPS. I mean, I think it should probably be about maybe 3 to 4 percentage points higher than in CPS. But nevertheless, this is why I use this as the denominator, meals received per food insecure person, because the food insecurity reports are, of course, accurate. But reports of meals received per reported CFA recipient may not be accurate. But what even you see here is that the meals reported, because there was, more people going to these places, but it wasn't, I mean, it's not that much different than 2018, right? 2020 looks a lot like 2018 in all of this. Okay, so this is the story that I'm going to be telling about this. So I can take questions if it takes away from my time, right, Drew? I got 20 minutes, so 5 minutes, okay. Yeah.
What percentage of CFA recipients are food insecure?
Yeah, it's roughly between, depends upon the data set, about 65%. So in other words, roughly 1 in 3 people going to food banks are not food insecure. And that's roughly consistent with Food in America has something called the Hunger in America survey, which took place back in 2014. And that one was, there was roughly 80% were food insecure. We're getting slightly lower numbers here, but the majority. Okay, before I turn to the next things, any other questions or comments? Okay, good. Okay, and this is going to give everybody else a lot more time to talk because I'm not going to use up my full time. So this is really, really interesting work. No, it's not. I mean, it is, but this is some interesting findings. Is if we look at, so some of you may be familiar with Feed America's Map to Meal Gap. Okay, and using Feed America's Map to Meal Gap is we're able to get food bank level data on food insecurity rates, okay? So this is a picture of food insecurity rates from this time period. Like we have like food banks like DC. DC has really low food insecurity rates, roughly some of the lowest in the country, all the way up to some of the food banks with some of the highest ones. Okay? But notice the range. Notice the range. The lowest ones like DC are roughly 7%. The highest ones are like 18%. Okay, you see this disparity here. Okay, it seems large. This next one though is, in my opinion, shocking and really a big part of the story. This is pounds per food insecure person by food bank. Okay, so is then what you see here is look at this. Some of these food banks are giving people roughly 50 pounds per food insecure person. Other food banks are giving, upwards of 400 pounds per food insecure person. There's a huge difference across the country in terms of how much food banks are giving to individuals. I mean, this disparity, you're not going to see this in SNAP. You're not going to see this in other things. So I think this is a really interesting part of the story in terms of looking at food banks in the United States is in terms of the distribution. I mean, well, I won't get into some of the issues about this, but this is something that I think is really interesting worth talking about. So to conclude, no, I don't conclude. I just finished. I'm done. Oh, wait, I'll take 2 questions because I have 3 more minutes, right? 3 more minutes, Drew? 2 more minutes, okay.
For some of us in the audience who are really interested in this topic but don't know as well, a food bank is different than a food pantry. Right? So they're maybe distributing food down to food pantries versus directly to people. Yeah. So, I'm sorry. I should have said this at the outset. I apologize. Food banks. So you have Feed America, which is the umbrella organization of all food banks in the United States. There's 200 food banks in the United States. A food bank. So, for example, I'm in the biggest food bank in the country, Houston Food Bank, in the greatest city in the country, nay, the world. If you want to live in a great Houston, leaving Houston aside for the moment, but is that there's probably like 1,000 agencies that they're called in the Houston Food Bank where they're distributing food. So when I say people are going to a food bank, they're not really going to the food bank, they're going to an agency within that. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
So how do you calculate those insecurity rates by food bank?
Oh, this is taken from, so from at the meal gap from Feeding America, where we have county level estimates of food insecurity, they also present them at the food bank level.
So you're basically, this estimating procedure is like 2 steps, right? You first the state level, and then how you downsize it to the food bank level.
So we downsize it to the county level, and then we aggregate up to the food bank level. That's how we get this. Speaking of which, Feed America's Math and Meal Gap, most recent results just came out. County level estimates are also this year, we broke it down by Black, white, and Hispanic for those of you who are interested in these things by the county. Also zip code and census tract level stuff is available. Drew, do I have time more for one more question, or should I just stop? One more question. Be brief.
Okay, so it's just so these are just banks. So that even if an agency has a different way of distributing the food, you are aggregating up anyway. So
right, and it's just pounds, yeah, yeah, and it's just pounds. That's all it is. We're not, yeah. Okay, thank you.
guys. Hi, Lisa. Yeah, following Craig. Why did I do that? Let me see if I can find. Is it in here? Drew? Where is it? Oh, it's on the desktop. Okay. Hi, everybody. So my name is Ann Byrne. I'm a research agricultural economist with the USDA Economic Research Service. I'm excited to be here giving my first presentation in 3 years wearing shoes. And I'm excited to see so many ERSers in the crowd and other familiar faces. And thank you all for being here. So I'm going to present some work that I'm doing with Craig and my colleague Matt Rabbit at ERS. This is looking at food assistance use over the life cycle in the United States. If you do engage with Twitter with these things, I'm at EconAn. USDA ERS is the ERS handle, and of course the conference hashtag is AAEA Anna 2020. So before I begin, just a quick disclaimer, which you've probably seen if you've seen an ERS presentation, and you've probably seen one because there's a lot of us. But the findings and conclusions in this presentation are those of the authors and should not be construed to represent any official USDA or US government determination or policy. And then the other disclaimer on this is I'm going to present some data at the end that comes from a private data set that I acquired as a grad student. It's not a USDA or ERS data set, and it was acquired before I was employed there. So to kind of give some context on this, Craig and Matt and I have all been working on things that are related for a while, and we kind of came together on this question of, initially, how is private food assistance changing as people age and as different cohorts age? But then, that relates to public food assistance too, right? And so we've kind of come together on that question. And, ultimately it's a question about food security and aging, which has a tremendous literature. There's a ton of people who've done a lot of work on aging and food security, on aging and food access. And there's a lot to cover there, but I do want to highlight kind of where I began, thinking about this stuff, which is with this AEPP special issue that came out in May. It's looking at senior hunger and covers a variety of different aspects of senior hunger. Is there someone in the chat? Oh, Quentin says hi. Hi, Quentin. Hi, Eleonora. So this special issue, which if you haven't read, check it out. It's a fantastic special issue. It covers, sort of this idea of the millions of Americans, millions of people over 60 who are food insecure in the United States, and all of the different causes and consequences that's an issue, and sort of notes that we've done a lot of research on food insecurity among children and some of these other groups, but this particular subset has been, has not received the attention that it could. And so just to give you a sense of what's in that special issue and sort of some of the context that we're thinking about when we're thinking about these dynamics, if I can change. So there's, there's information about how different financial decisions impact food insecurity. There's information about how, food insecurity and food insufficiency changes depending on measurement windows, information about SNAP participation and sort of how seniors are limited in terms of SNAP participation compared to younger people. There's also, some work looking at COVID in particular and some of these older American Act programs like Meals on Wheels, and how seniors accessed different programs as they were affected by COVID-19, and certain food assistance programs were available and certain food assistance were less available. And then looking at just the broader food infrastructure. Do you have, what do you have in your radius in terms of meal delivery and food assistance and farmers markets and that sort of thing. And then again, some of these financial changes, Social Security and how that impacts people's overall ability to be food secure. So what we focus on is kind of looking at private food assistance use over the life cycle, with an emphasis on food banks and food pantries. So private food assistance, of course, has, congregate meal sites and soup kitchens and Meals on Wheels and some of these other programs, but food banks and food pantries are the largest component of private food assistance. And as Craig mentioned, the bank is the big distribution center. The pantries are the individual distributions to the clients. And, those are mobile pantries, they're school pantries, they're medical pantries, they're church pantries, lots of different ways in which that happens. But we also compare it to broader food assistance, including SNAP, and also just budget shortcomings. So how are people's budgets fluctuating as they get older, and across these different cohorts as these different cohorts get older. And at this stage, we're focusing on national data, with some gut checks using this Northern Colorado Food Bank data that sort of provides a little bit more granular look. And I will tell you, this project is it's early and we have some preliminary results and I want to share them with you, but I'm also really interested in feedback. But yeah, so we're going to get at this question of how does the use of food assistance, especially private food assistance, change as people age? And for those of you who aren't familiar with the current population survey food security supplement, this is an ERS and census collaboration. It's a fantastic product. If you're familiar with the household food security report, which gets like 1 million citations a year, so you probably are. This is the data product that forms the foundation of all of that information. And we look at it between 2001 and 2020, in part because that's, it's been taken in December every year in that range. And so we can not worry about seasonality issues in the same way that we might have to if we pull some of the older years when it was taken in other months. And there's questions about SNAP, there's questions about food pantry use, there's questions about community meals and meal delivery. And then there's also questions about food security and questions about like food expenditures and budget gaps. So we restrict it to 18 to 80-year-olds to look at that range. And then, collect like 1.6 different respondents over the course of the 20 years, and weight them by the food security supplement person weight variable. So we're thinking about overall resources. We're thinking about the types of assistance. We're thinking about the assistance participation at the extensive margin. Are they in or out? And at the intensive margin, are they, if they're in, how much are they in? So the first graph I want to show you is just looking at this. So there's a question in the food security supplement where it asks you, do you have enough money for the food that you need? And you go yes or no. And if you say no, they ask you, how much more money do you need to meet your weekly food needs? And this is looking at that question. So among people who expressed, this idea that they needed more money to meet their weekly food needs, how much more did they need? And we map it across different age cohorts so that the green, which is the bottom, is the oldest age cohort. These are people who were born in the 40s. The red is the middle age cohort. These are people who were born in the 1950s. And the blue is the youngest age cohort, which is people who were born in the 1960s. And so what we see is that there are these cohort differences. I mean, so people who are, who are younger have, higher overall, everybody's food needs are increasing, and those who are older have sort of are at the lowest point, and those who are younger have sort of this highest need for more food to meet their food budget needs. And we can look at them when they were the same age. So this is when they were 50 to 60. This is, the line, the dotted line corresponds to the point that they were at when they were in the 50 to 60 age range. And we see that people who were born in the 1940s are at the lowest, people who were born in the 1950s are middle, and people who were born in the 1960s were highest. And so what we're seeing is that the food needs are increasing as we sort of move to newer and newer cohorts. So then we can look at that, and so we keep that in mind as we look at adults living in households with at least one adult who used food assistance. So these numbers are all going to look a little bit inflated because it's people who are in a household with somebody using food assistance. They're not necessarily using food assistance themselves. But we see, it's gone up since 2000. And if we break it down by what they're using, so just public or just private or both, a lot of this is driven by SNAP. And this is what Craig mentioned before, is that SNAP is the big supplier of food assistance, but this is non-trivial. It's definitely non-trivial. And as we see, it's growing. And we can look at this across these cohorts again. So these are people born in the 1940s. Food assistance, overall food assistance is going up. And a lot of that is driven by private food assistance. So that red line, people who are only using private food assistance, we see a pretty clear upward trend from, when they were in their 50s to when they're in their 70s. If we look at sort of the next youngest cohort, again, food assistance use is going up. And we see, again, sort of an upward trend with private food assistance, with a pretty big spike in 2020, which, as we all know, is sort of a unique year when it comes to many things. And then if we look at the youngest of these adult cohorts, all food assistance is going up. And again, sort of private food assistance is going up as well. But if we compare, like the private food assistance here is kind of going, below 5%, except when we get to the 2020 spike. If we go back to that older cohort, these people born in the 40s, their use of private food assistance goes up, and it goes up quite a bit more. And so part of this, and there's a lot more to dig into, I think, to really confirm this hypothesis, but one kind of working hypothesis from this is that, we talk about how there's a decrease in SNAP use among seniors, and they're harder to enroll in, but it might be cohort effects. It might not be, the 65-year-olds of today are not the 65-year-olds of 20 years ago, and they're not the 65-year-olds of 20 years from now. And so there might be, some distinct cohort effects that we're seeing, especially in terms of a couple of these different uses of private food assistance. So this is the CPS data, and then I pull a little bit of analysis from this Northern Colorado administrative data. So this is a data set where everybody is sort of registered according to their household head. So you're looking at, the individual primary shopper, and you don't have full information about the whole household, which is of course a major limitation. But you get this daily visit log, and so you can see absolutely how many times they visited. It's a big and robust and generous food bank network, and so people can go up to twice per week. They can get like 3 bags of groceries, and so people do oftentimes go quite frequently, as compared to some of these smaller pantries where it's like open once a month. And so the data set has about 13 years of data. It has 13 years of data, and then there's about 130,000 household year observations, some households being observed in multiple years. And it's 1.8 million visits. So you can kind of see some stuff. So first, just looking at users by age, we see that a lot of users are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. And when we weight that by, per capita, according to the county statistics, it evens out quite a bit more. And then when we weight it by household size, it evens out even more. And in fact, we see that older people are maybe a little bit more represented given their household size. But this is the part that I think is most interesting about the administrative data, which is when we look at visits per user among users, it's like this super steady increase across as they get older. Or as we move up in age. I guess they're not individually getting older. But so we see, people who are in their 20s and 30s are visiting 5 to 10 times per year on average, but people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And there are far fewer people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s using this program, but they are visiting far more frequently. So there's there's sort of this tension where you have, people who are older are potentially using using food banks at the extensive margin more frequently because they're opting to use it, but they're also just using it at the intensive margin more frequently. So some of the key takeaways from this preliminary analysis is just that younger cohorts are in need are farther from meeting their food budget needs. So we're seeing this cohort difference in terms of the ability to meet their food budget needs, which is inevitably going to intersect with food security and potentially intersect with accessing food assistance programs. And then among those in their 70s, private food assistance take-up has grown with age, while public food assistance has remained more constant, but it remains to be seen if those in their 70s now are going to look the same as those who are currently in their 50s when they're in their 70s. And then, among those in their 50s and 60s, both private food assistance take-up and public food assistance take-up has increased. And then finally, even when food pantry use frequency increases with age, take-up may not. So next steps, there's a couple different things that we want to examine. We want to think about the different types of private food assistance. So you have these meal delivery services, you have congregate meals, there's some other forms of private food assistance, and some of them, like Meals on Wheels, are very much targeted towards older people. And so we would expect to see a different breakdown as people age. We want to look across racial and ethnic groups, and then start to think about how food security status is related to these kinds of questions, as well as food expenditures. So that's all I have for you.
She still has 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Another time, so if you have questions, feel free to ask.
Hey, Leslie.
Hi. I was wondering if you had thought about kind of like caloric needs or doing something kind of with that piece,
right?
With like data that we also have at USDA to think about, your ability to meet your food budget, but also then, what kind of, if you're like a, primary working adult or maybe still in the labor force,
right?
50s, if you're,
yeah,
needs are just greater, or like,
right,
that's playing into food budget.
That's a great call. I have not looked into it. I think that's a great call.
Or in the health, right?
Yeah.
Piggybacking off her question, have you thought about it from the location standpoint of like rents and so forth? So like out here in California, housing is so expensive. So we do have to make repeat visits to the food banks in order to. Yeah,
and I think there's, in the Craig mentioned the Hunger in America study, and there's a really great graphic it's not great because it's not great information to know is true, but there's a graphic in their like executive summary where they talk about the key trade-offs that people are making, in housing, utilities, healthcare, and I think you're right, like these other things that people substitute across between food and other needs are definitely a key piece. They have to be, right? Yeah, Alessandro?
It might be wrong, so correct me when resonate with you, but the current population survey does not collect data on elderly who live in assisted living and any other type of facilities. And so when we work on something related, actually we got the same patterns where the older generation, older the elder, the lower the security rate. So something that I started working on is actually taking into account that aspect. So nothing, but one hypothesis is that you have sample selection.
Right.
Actually, that
Right.
people who are who own a home or can live by themselves and they're not in assisted living or any other
Right.
facility stay in the survey.
Right.
And people who instead might be more subject to still experience food insecurity.
Right.
So we are currently working on that. I have no idea if that is an issue right now, but
that's that's
something that
very important. Yeah. Yeah.
It is an issue with the CPS.
With the
but,
CPS.
I don't know if you know about that, take that into account or not.
Were you gonna say? Yeah, please. Yeah.
So this declining age gradient, it's a big, Jim and I have been talking about this. The 60-year-old, 80-year-olds have much lower rates than 60-year-olds.
Right. Right.
We actually think our conjecture right now is differential mortality. In other words, those who are 60 years old, if they had lived to be 80, they would show similar rates as 60, but they died.
Right.
And the
It's
80-year-olds.
still sample selection.
Right.
A different sample selection.
Yeah. And that was why we cut it off at 80, because there are people in this, who are in their 80s and 90s, but it's a small number, and that was part of the reason to cut it off at 80, which is still, you're lucky to make it to 80, but
in a case whether you're dead or you
right,
live in,
or there's
living,
yeah,
no longer part of that sample.
Right. No, that's a great point.
Yeah. So I mean, I understand what you're saying, that there is probably some truth, but I would not make the, there is still something that's because of the data we cannot observe. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So praise to you for using the dollars needed. It's a woefully underutilized measure. For those of you in the room, it's almost all we use it in that meal gap, and there's some other work using it, but it's a woefully underutilized data. So I'm really happy to see you using that. One question I had about that is, that there's a lot of people who are food insecure who say they don't eat $0 more.
Right.
So I'm wondering, at that extensive margin of reporting,
interacting.
Change in the cohorts, part of it is driven by, like I said, what other changes over the cohorts?
Yeah. We need to add that. And I included it because of our last talk. Yeah, that's a good call.
It was a great way to measure the depth of food insecurity for those who find it.
Yeah.
Really great measure.
This is the only requirement for those who say
no.
Any other questions? I think we're out of time.
We're out of time.
Yeah.
So if you have more questions, we can ask.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Would you do that? I was going to do it on my phone. Yes. Thank you. That'd be awesome. Great. So 20 minutes. So, uh-oh. So Craig and I should have coordinated maybe a little bit better on our presentations. I'll be using, I think, some similar data, but at Ohio level. So not at the national level, but focused on Ohio. And so I'm going to kind of breeze through some of the
I think we're just confirming that it said that if you trust the file.
Really? Okay, maybe let's try again. I had opened it up before. I do have it on my OneDrive. Sorry about this. I'm not sure what happened here. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Okay, so this is joint work. So like I said, I'll be using what I believe is some of the similar data that Craig had shared, but at Ohio, and taking a little bit different angle on looking at maybe trying to understand a little bit of motivation or why people are accessing these resources. And so this is joint work with a colleague of mine, Tian Lo from OSU. And she is a research associate at the Center for Human Resource Research. And so I do need to put a disclaimer up here that the work that we share is not reflective of opinions or views of either Ohio Associated Food Banks or Center for Human Resource Research at the Ohio State University. All right. So I'm going to kind of skip through this and just reiterate what Craig had said about, there's no change in food insecurity, and it's probably like all the government response that went on during that time, as well as, donations to food banks. Yeah, but we did see that surge in demand for private food assistance. And so why are people seeking food pantry assistance? Okay, so why did they go?
You share your screen.
Share screen. Do we stop sharing? All right, sorry about that. Anyway, so why are people accessing food assistance even prior to the pandemic? Okay, and so people may not meet the SNAP or WIC requirements, but still need the assistance. There's a SNAP cycle. Some work, recent work illustrates that. Also, people may not have been aware of food assistance, like all the waivers and everything that were available to them. And an idea of stigma that we are working on right now and hopefully can get in the future. We've been accessing some SNAP data to try and see if that might be something that affects people's decisions to access these private food assistance. Okay, so then really our overarching question here is, how does demand in Ohio change during COVID? And our preliminary results, and Craig had alluded to this, where there were a lot of new households, but really that's what we see as one of the interesting aspects in the Ohio data, and I'll kind of share that here in a little bit. We also see households, the primary individual being female, and then slightly younger two-parent households with children. But this is not a big change, okay, in the data. All right, so just thinking about households' decision to access benefits in general, okay, would we think about real simple utility function, with benefits, okay, where Y is an income and B is the actual benefit received, which can be a function of income. Now, food pantry assistance, some pantries require, right, you to, actually no, food pantry assistance they give to anyone who comes in, okay, and there's no like income requirement. Whereas with SNAP or other food assistance programs, there's an income requirement. And so you may wonder why I put this Y as part of the benefit function here. It's because I would argue, households with the income just don't need it, right? Just don't need it. And so I just leave that in there still, even though it's not the same way we think of SNAP or WIC, okay? Then there's the cost, okay? So there's a stigma cost potentially associated with it. We can also think of, you have to travel to the food bank or food pantry to access those resources, okay? So that's actually a variable we will look at as well in terms of how that changed after COVID. So given that the utility, that net kind of benefit and utility is greater than utility from not receiving any benefit at all, household is going to access, go to a food pantry, okay? We'll think of Z as just characteristics of the household, all right? So we think about, in the context of COVID, existing households probably still need help, okay? In other words, households have already been accessing food pantry resources in the past. And we think about at the margin, the new households will likely access food. These resources, why? Okay, lose income, pretty obvious. But also think about potentially if many of my neighbors, right, I may not have gone in the past because maybe I needed it, but I was worried about the stigma associated with it. If a lot of people are going to access, maybe I'd be more likely to go. That may be another reason. And then looking at actual distance traveled, right? Our households needing to travel further to access these resources during COVID. So the data we'll use here is food pantries registered with the Ohio Associated Food Banks. And so that's part of the Feeding America Coalition of food banks. We have, I think there's one food bank in Ohio that's not registered, okay? So to consider the breadth of coverage across Ohio, okay? So there's one up in, I believe it was the Toledo area, that is not covered. And thinking about Craig's final chart that he showed, how, you looked at pounds of food per insecure person at food banks, I think Ohio may be somewhere on the lower end, which that was a really informative chart that I think will help put some of this stuff into context. So the sample period we have for our data runs from January 2019 through October 2021. So we're really at the beginning. Sorry, that's not October, that's October 2020. My bad on that. So we're really at the initial stages of the pandemic in our data. And what we end up doing is to try and make as clean of a comparison as possible, is separate our data between March and April of 2019 and then March and April of 2020. And then we do the same March to October of 2019 to get a little bit longer term perspective in these comparisons. And then household characteristics, you have age. This is always relative to the reference person who comes and accesses the resources. You have age, gender, marital status, number of children, number of adults, number of seniors, and then distance traveled to the food pantry. We did a little bit of cleaning in the data. We've wanted to focus on Ohio residents only. We also dropped households with 0 family members. There weren't a lot, but there were some. And then removed records where round trip was more than 250 miles. So Ohio is kind of like a box-ish. So north and south is about 250 miles, east to west is roughly 250 miles. So if you're traveling further than we were, guessing you're probably traveling outside of Ohio to access food assistance. We were staying within, because of our data, we were staying within the state, okay? And I've already mentioned these subsamples we're working with. So just want to show you some of the descriptive trends that we see in our data. So think about supply considerations in Ohio, you know, just anecdotally talking to our colleagues that helped us acquire these data, you know, there were most of the locations remained open, okay? However, right, not all locations had the same staff. And so Ohio actually deployed the National Guard to help distribute a lot of these food banks. And I actually had a student in a class of mine who ended up going up into the Cleveland area to distribute. He was part of the National Guard, and that was his deployment, was to help distribute food as part of the food bank. But you can see here, right? I just show this to illustrate, in terms of number of locations that were actually open, it didn't really change much, okay? Now the question of, were these open the same hours, the same number of days a week? I don't know, okay? But at least the number of locations remained fairly consistent. This is where it starts getting pretty interesting. And so here, the top charts are just the total number of visits in Ohio. You can see quite a bit of variation in color. What do the colors mean? So the left chart is March to April, the right chart is March to October, and the colors represent the percent change between 2019 and 2020. So the redder the color, the larger percent change, and the bluer color, the smaller the percent change, where actually blue is, the darker the blue, it's a negative change in 2020. And so you can see in terms of total number of visits, it's not red all the way across the state. You do see a little bit of, you do see some blue in there, okay, which is quite interesting. And you do see some really dark red kind of on the Indiana border. And honestly, I was expecting to see a lot more red in the Appalachian counties, which would be, you know, right here, Kentucky, West Virginia, Pennsylvania border. Yeah, Ann.
Do you have pallets distributed wrong? I asked because, like, I was working with our food bank, right, you know, early COVID, and the distributions were a lot bigger. Mm-hmm. Because they were doing the drive-through. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so we do have some of that, and I'm not sure how good the data are, but I'll definitely. Yeah, to the extent that you can. Yeah, good thought. So definitely look at that. If we look at like the new families, the percent change in number of new families, March to April, March to October, we see mostly red throughout Ohio. So a lot of families who had not accessed the assistance prior to COVID were now going, which, you know, makes sense based on the needs. So just real quickly, how are we defining new families? Okay, so in the data, there's actually an indicator that says a family has never been to a food pantry before, or at least has never registered in our system before. And so that's what we used here. And in some of the, we'll show some household level, this is all at county level, some household level trends. But then in our estimation, we actually, for comparison's sake, thinking about a new family, just one sec, thinking about a new family, for comparison's sake, we say, were you ever within our sample frame considered new? In order to capture, thinking about a new family post-COVID, they hadn't been before, trying to think about them still as new. Yeah, question back here.
And I'm curious, do you have a way to uncover whether someone is misreporting themselves as new, given that you're concerned about stigma, the effect of stigma?
So new is actually an agency variable. So they indicate whether this, so you receive some sort of you know, ID or indicator. So it's actually generated by the Food Bank Association that this family has not been to in the past, or they have come previously. So, I mean, to the degree that it's perfect, I mean, there may be ways, but it's an administrative data in that sense. It's not self-reported. So, yeah. Okay, thanks.
But my quick question is, so the Ohio Association of Food Banks,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Uh-huh.
So are they an umbrella of other food bank networks in Ohio?
Yeah, so it encompasses like the Mid-Ohio Food Bank and other food banks. So it's basically all the food banks in Ohio that collaborate with Feeding America. And so, like I said, it captures all but one, maybe two food banks in Ohio, which are in Ohio, one or two.
And that's good, because the reason why I'm asking that question too is because I know that there are service areas that govern the food banks within a state.
Mm-hmm.
So in Arizona, there's 5 food banks within the state of Arizona that govern service areas that encompass a certain number of counties. And I see. That your graphs or your maps are level.
Yes.
But if it's OFB and it's all of Ohio, I just more or less see how maybe there was some spillover.
Oh, I see.
Across stages.
Yeah, no, it's pretty much all food banks in Ohio. So, let's see. And so here, this is weekly visits, total weekly visits. So the red line is total and the blue line is new families. And I include a few black lines here at the beginning of the trends to illustrate the SNAP cycle. You can really see that as you go across. And this big black line right here represents the pandemic, right when it began. And the uptick in demand for food assistance in Ohio, maybe, there's definitely an uptick, but the seasonality through Thanksgiving and Christmas was a whole lot bigger. And yeah.
Just a suggestion, it would be interesting to include the stimulus check dates.
Oh, good thought. Okay, thank you. But if we see, I know it's a little bit messy, a lot of lines going on here, but if you look at the blue line, that's representing new families, you see a huge jump, okay? And so a lot of that increased demand, at least in Ohio, with new families. And that the new family axis is right here relative to total family, okay? Now, I just threw this up here. We all know the story. Huge increase in unemployment, which maps perfectly with that increase in new family visits. I'm just gonna, let's see. Oh, and then as far as distance traveled goes, okay, we see quite a big jump in the round trip distance traveled for families so willing to travel to further distances. And that actually increases a little bit over time. And then we broke that out by new families. If you compare the axis, new families are already traveling a little bit further. Once again, this is all descriptive, but a lot of variation in that, okay? And another variable we've just started unpacking, needing to do a little bit more, is increase in days between visits. So I'm curious to talk a little bit more, Craig, about if people are visiting more often, right? This might be an artifact of Ohio, or maybe I'm reading the data wrong. But just something we noticed, days between visits actually was going up here in Ohio, which was quite interesting to us. There was already a pre-trend in number of days between visits, which makes sense. Food insecurity is decreasing. You would expect number of days between visits then, but at the pandemic, it jumps and then kind of falls back. And so it could be people just didn't want to go out, right? I'm not going out. And so there's that jump there. Anyway, interesting, not a huge difference. Not a huge number of days, okay? So I'm gonna skip real quick because I'm almost out of time. So just some of the preliminary regressions we've run. New families, this is holding several things fixed. We see this is a logistic regression. This is the odds ratio we report, quite high likelihood of new family. And then distance, a round trip distance is almost 1.5 additional miles, which doesn't seem really far, like if I got a car, but if, lower income, you don't have access to good transportation, that can actually end up being a decent distance. And that was from March to April. And then if we go from March to October, the likelihood of new family actually decreases, but the round trip distance traveled actually goes up a little bit further, almost to 3 miles. So almost doubles for distance traveled. So, just real quickly, yes?
And the N is household month?
Yes. These are household weeks. Yes, household weeks. Okay. So some of the future work, I'm looking to understand a little bit more about this, decision to go to the pantry. And so building a random utility model, which we hope to include some of these county level estimates of, for example, the ratio of SNAP participants to total county participants, and to see how that changes and see if that correlation between, me being a new family or going to the food pantry and some other characteristics of the sort of that general neighborhood that these households live in. So that's perfect timing. Time's up. So thank you, and we will turn time over for our last presentation from Katya. Let's see. Close it.
Okay, I hope that people on Zoom can see my slides. If not, please tell me. Hello, everyone. My name is Katya. I'm a second-year PhD student at Arizona State University. And today I will be presenting the project called Food Insecurity and Food Bank Donations that I'm working on with Dr. Timothy Richards and Dr. Chinerides, who's here today, and Dr. Lori. Dr. Richards and Dr. Chinerides are professors from ASU, and Dr. Lori is an assistant professor at Northeastern University. This is ongoing research, so I will be happy to hear your comments, suggestions, or anything that could help me to improve this work. So as we have a nice tradition here, a bit of disclaimers. This analysis findings and conclusions presented in this study should not be attributed to the Nielsen company. So if you read the news recently, you might have seen that there is some need in food bank donations, like several national and local news. They reported that there is some need in donations. And despite the fact that Dr. Gunderson said that food insecurity rates are not higher, or for now they're on the same level as to pre-pandemic levels, I think the need in food donations is still valid as a problem. And we see some evidences that retail donations are one of the main sources of food in food banks. And there are a lot of companies that donated a lot of food in 2020, for example, and the amount of food donated was even very close to the amount donated by the USDA. So what are the motives of retailers to donate more food? There are several studies that show that donors combine two kind of sides of incentives. First one is their strategic incentives to optimize, to get more profit. And another side is to do some like corporate social responsibility acts or like moral side of this question. And we see that this initiative of donating more food to food banks is well perceived by people, and these companies have better reputations. So then our research question is, what factors influence retailers' decisions to donate food? And our hypothesis that we've tested is that retailers' donation decisions are based on those incentives of corporate social responsibility. And the mechanism how it works, or at least we think how it might work, that retailers observe the area or some need in food donations around them, and this force them, or they think that they might donate more food because of that. So we think that food insecurity is something that will force retailers to donate more food. And the preliminary results of this study is that food insecurity rates appear to be insignificant in determining retailers' donation decisions. So we think it's the second order effect. But let me explain how we got those results and what alternative mechanism might be behind this. So I think you're very familiar now with the whole distribution of the food donations in the US, but there's Feed in America that gets food from retail donors and the USDA and then distributed to local food pantries or food agencies, how we call it here. And in our analysis, we focused only on the first kind of stage, and we omit those donations that comes from the USDA, and we do not consider in our analysis those donations that come directly from donors to these local food agencies. So we're looking to only donations that come from retail donors to Feed in America food banks. So in our empirical approach, first we defined retail food donations and link them to food insecurity as a variable that represents those corporate social responsibility incentives. And we think that they're linked together through local food banks. They often might articulate to those retail food donors that there's higher need in some counties of those donations. So food donors are aware that, oh yeah, maybe we can donate more if there's some need in that. So as I understand, like Feed in America and the food banks that are in the network of Feed in America, they are aware of the situation within their service areas or counties they're responsible for. So we see that some other factors can also influence those decisions of the donors why they donate food. We think that geographical heterogeneity might influence their decisions. So if for donor, it's very expensive to deliver those donations to food banks, or the area is very sparse and there's not much going on, we think it might influence their decision. And also market environment, so the amount of surplus that retail food donors have might also be dependent on market environment, as the number of retail chain stores inside of this county, their revenue, commercial area, and so on. So there is a well-known indigeneity problem between food insecurity and retail food donations, as you might know. So we think that our initial kind of link from food insecurity to retail food donations going through local food banks determines that in areas where food insecurity is high, retail food donations will be also higher, because those local food banks articulate to retail donors that they need more food. However, another kind of simultaneous relationship could be observed or maybe not, that retail food donations, when retail food donations are higher, food insecurity should be lower.
I have a question. So are you assuming that when a retailer locates or decides the assortment or prices, they have no clue what the food insecurity rate is? Because if I locate in an area where I know that it's more poverty, I will probably have an assortment of product, a pricing strategy that takes that into account. Therefore, food insecurity is not just a driver of hotel food location, but affects a lot more. I am not sold by that.
Okay, but can I ask a question? So if, for example, the initial situation in a county was, for example, it was it was food insecure area, and then a retailer decides to place a store in this area, they have one strategy, but then the situation with food insecurity changes, but the store is still there.
So this applies only if there is a substantial change in food insecurity from the initial condition. And so this is very, it is important to make the remark. It's not just food insecurity, it's when assuming that there is a change for which they have done that investments, they are there, they have contracts, some of the product doesn't sell anymore.
So you're saying that I have to use as a factor, as my factor influence retail food donations change in food insecurity, but not food insecurity rate itself, right?
I would say so, because I mean, to me, but probably I'm wrong. You're fine.
I think it's a reasonable point. The other thing I would say is that the county is a pretty big geography.
Yeah.
Thinking about this stuff, I would try to get a little more granular.
This is one of my concerns, but I think the main issue with this analysis is that we were able to get food insecurity rates on the county level. So if there's any other measure how I account for food insecurity, yeah, I know that, yeah, but this is how, how it works. And if there's another measure accounting for food insecurity that I can use, I am glad to hear any suggestions.
Like I say, I mean, it is, I don't know,
for
the zip code, we do have zip code level food insecurity rates.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's what you're telling
me.
Right,
no. They're just, yeah, there are food insecurity rates for the zip code level, but they're not available for the, I think they're available for very like limited years. I think it's like 2018 or something. So,
and this is conceptual at the moment too.
Yeah. So as I said, it's
point well taken on retail locations. Right?
Yeah, it's a great point. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I can continue. So yeah, first we focus on the definition of food insecurity, and there is a standard way how we define food insecurity rate. We used the data from MAP, the meal gap tool from Feeding America. This is how the rate is calculated, and we used food insecurity rates for a county level. And because food insecurity rate is constructed using food insecurity determinants, we used them in our analysis. So those determinants are median income, unemployment, poverty, home ownership, and percentage of Black population and Hispanic population. I think now the methodology is kind of changed. Yeah, and you added disability. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, to the analysis, and we will also consider it in our future research. So this is how we constructed the estimated measure of food insecurity through those food insecurity determinants that are used to count food insecurity on a county level. So we kind of recapture this approach that Feeding America used to estimate food insecurity, and use kind of the initial logic behind it. And because there's an endogeneity problem, we used those food insecurity determinants as our instrument, along with the variables that account for market environment and geographical heterogeneity that also might influence retail donations. So as for retail food donations, we define them, so we aggregate them. We have some data for each retailer, and we aggregate them for a county level. So this is the formula that we used. And then on the second stage of our empirical approach, we regress retail food donations on all of the factors, including estimated food insecurity, to understand if there is a link. Yeah, and this is the variables that I used to account for geographical heterogeneity and then market environment. So this is the second stage of my empirical model. So in the first stage, I used the linear regression. On the second stage, I used a Tobit model to account for those counties where there were 0 donations in some years. And there are county and year fixed effects in the final version of the model. So this is the research data that we used. We used the data of 3 large food banks. It's Mid-Ohio Food Bank, Central Texas Food Bank, and Tarrant Area Food Bank. So in Ohio and Texas, food insecurity rates from Map the Meal Gap by Feeding America, food insecurity determinants and variables of geographical heterogeneity from American Community Survey, and the variables of market environment are from TTLink's database.
Do you also have just like characteristics
Do you mean like number of visitors or something?
The number of staff, or like do they have certain outreach programs? Like
no.
CTFB, yes, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think we have this data. And the data that we have, it's all only like pounds distributed. So yeah, but we might, yeah.
I guess my thought is like if it seems to be a communication piece for the food banks, they're having you know, there's got to be some communication about the food security issue, and presumably the food banks would be responsible for you know, making that connection to the dollars. You know, those that are more heavily staffed and have more outreach programs and have more advertising, you know, and just have the capacity to do that may have different outcomes than those that have more limited capacity to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you.
A quick question for you. Why don't you just have Black and Hispanic population?
Yeah, this is. So this is food insecurity determinants that Feeding America used for determining food insecurity rates. I think they checked other variables and they probably appear to be insignificant in determining food insecurity rates. So
I think it would take away from the validity a little bit. I think you can include all.
So part of the reason why I can't include Asia is that most states don't have almost 0 numbers of Asian in terms of CPS. It's just too small a sample size. That's why we couldn't.
Yeah, question.
Yeah, I mean, so your donation is total donations in a county?
We have the data for retailers too, it would be a great idea to aggregate for retail level, but then food insecurity rates, it doesn't.
So the food insecurity rate is at the county level.
Yeah.
Total donations is at the total county, right? And all those variables are rates, like percentage population being poor or moderate. So why isn't your donation by store? You have a variable that is looking at donations for each store times all the stores, and there would be more stores in the county.
Right.
But I don't see any population, I don't see any size control. So what I'm saying is it possible that you have a variable in level, total donation, that is explained by a rate, food insecurity, and that's why you don't find a lot of significance. Would it be rate of donations? You have revenues too. So donations over revenue, I mean.
Yeah, account for your comment. I think we have population density that kind of accounts for.
It accounts for metro, like rural, urban. It doesn't account for size of the county.
Oh, you mean like the total area of a county?
Total population, I mean,
yeah. So you're saying that it would be more valuable for me to look to the donation rates, right?
If it's available, then you should have a donation per store in a county.
Yeah.
Because the larger the county, the more the donations you will have, unless they're all cheap stores.
So you're just looking at the donations that came from retail?
Yeah.
From manufacturers? Or
no, so it's limited to retail donations. Yeah. I'm sorry, how much time do I have? Okay. So I will skip that. So this is the preliminary results of our study. I understand that, so there are several models that I've tested and they're allocated in terms of like difficulty from left to right. And when we control for all the variables that I've mentioned before and add year and county fixed effects, the significance of food insecurity, of estimated food insecurity vanishes. So that's why I said before that probably it's a second order effect. It's not that important, but I do understand that there's better way maybe to identify the model later. So if corporate social responsibility incentives are not important for retailers, what's the driver of their decisions to donate more food? So we think that the key is in supply chain failures, or the fact that retailers have some retail surplus available. And there are several studies that showing that this surplus caused by demand variability or the low ability of a retailer to predict the demand in a future period. And all of the supply chain models are based on the predicting demand first and then adding other variables to the model. So as an additional extension to our initial research question, we wanted to add some variable that can account for demand variability. So we understand what are the drivers of retail food donations. And my idea was to construct the measure of ability to predict demand using the amounts of those errors for each retailer. First, to find the optimal order quantity for each retailer using the new standard model. This comes from supply chain discipline, and the error or the surplus that each retailer gets in a given period will be the difference between this optimal order quantity and then realized demand. And for realized demand, we want to use Kilt scanner database. So knowing those errors, we hope to construct a measure or to find the coefficient of variation of those errors for each county and add it to the final stage of my model. So the next steps will be to add more data for other food banks that are available for us, test other instrumental variables, not only the food insecurity determinants that Feed in America used, and include this demand predictability measure into the model. And I hope I count for all the comments that I got today. Thank you.
We have time for one or two more questions.
Yeah. So at the retailer level, who makes the decision about it? Is it like a corporate decision?
About donations?
Yeah. The store is deciding to donate.
So
if it is part of a chain, can it simply just decide?
Yeah, after a couple of interviews with like different representatives of different stores, it really depends on the chain. Some of the decisions are made like generally on the country level. I know that Safeway, for example, they do not donate at all. They just compost all the surplus that they have. But sometimes local managers of some local retail stores, they support this initiative and they might collaborate with food banks. So I think it really depends. And
So this is exactly, this is what I said, there's no relation between donations and food. So it's perfect, this is much better. One thing is I want to put in a plug for.
But you look to the other side of this relationship, no?
I looked at the other side. What I'm saying is that we saw the food donations were not tied at all to food insecurity. But put in a plug for Tim's great paper. There's a European Review of Agricultural Economics looking at food banks and their decision about the stores to give.
About the markups?
Yeah, but no, about why they donate to food stores. It's a great paper for those who haven't seen it. By Tim Richards on this thing. Second thing is if you and anybody else in the room want zip code level food insecurity rates in a consistent framework all the way from 2009 to 2020, let me know and I'll give those to you.
Yeah, so unfortunately the data that we have there from 2011 to 2018. So this is, yeah, so this is was the problem for this level of analysis. There was another question?
The truth data, you get sales level, right?
Yeah.
So that would be.
So realized demand.
Realized demand. But because you look at the county level, how accurate will be that prediction model, the spender model? I mean, are you looking at stores?
No. Yeah, my idea was to predict the optimal order quantity for each retailer within a category. And then aggregate the errors between the optimal decisions.
Okay.
Yeah. And the initial idea was for a week, but I understand it's a lot of work.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work to get, I don't know. I mean,
yeah, and another idea of ours was to do it on retail level initially, but I don't clearly understand how to link it to food insecurity then, because food insecurity is on the county level. So, no, because they're only from 2019.
So I don't want to cut off any excellent conversation. Please continue going as you feel like you need, but thank you for attending this wonderful session.
Really great. I got a good picture of you. I'll send it to you. And if you want to chat more.
Thank you. Dr. Richard said no.